Justin, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Brian, thanks for having me.
Topic today is IT strategy for small to mid-sized businesses. And really, those needs are going to evolve as you grow and have new pain points. So, in your experience, Justin, what are some of the challenges you see businesses face as they get bigger?
So I think it mirrors the growth curve in any business, right? There are general buckets, 1 to 10 employees, 10 to 30, 30 to 50. The business is going through specific challenges at each point in terms of structure and communication and decision making, and the same challenges apply to their IT program. So starting out, there tends to just be a focus on getting stuff done, getting to positive earnings and things like that. And so IT structure can be an afterthought. Whereas, once you start to get to 30 to 50, 50 to 100, the way people communicate, the way information is stored and protected and shared, it just comes to the forefront because it becomes all the more real in terms of how their business operates. And so we always advise our clients to put that thought in early. The earlier you can think about structure, and it doesn't have to be complicated, but just being mindful of how the choices you make of your systems, your IT processes, what types of computers do your employees have? How do you think, how do you budget for your IT program? Getting that framework in early helps scale everything else. And so that's kind of the thought that we see.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We saw that, when I looked at IT strategy for a rapidly growing company, those decisions that you make are not fun to write in when you hit the 50, 60, 70 mark and you're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Now you've got systems in the wild that you have to change. Even as you highlighted, it doesn't have to be a heavy-handed IT strategy, but just taking the 2 seconds when you're at that starting stage of like, what does this generally need to be? Maybe talking to somebody. You don't have to hire them, but maybe talking to somebody for like, what should I be thinking about can definitely pay dividends. So you had mentioned this problem set follows most business cases of headcount size. You start seeing different things. So would like to really almost personify that and
Yeah.
deep
Yeah.
dive each one of those verticals. So, we started at the 1 to 10. You're first kicking off. What are some of the things to think about, the challenges you see, and maybe what you should be doing from an IT perspective when you're at that size?
Typically, what we see is businesses in that 1 to 10 employee range have kind of morphed from this bring your own device model where they're just using their own personal laptops. Maybe they're using their own personal iPad. They probably have a cloud-based email service, Google Workspaces or a Microsoft 365 that they've set up themselves, but they're administering everything themselves. Somebody in the organization is wearing the hat of
Yeah.
the de facto IT manager. When they hire a new employee, usually it's the CEO or co-founder is running to Best Buy or
Yeah.
hopping on Amazon and ordering a computer, maybe even delivering it to their house, setting it up. And I've been surprised. I've found a lot of businesses where they actually have documented processes, but it's just very manual and time consuming. And then they're also just opportunistic. They're looking on Amazon to find the deal of the day, or they're going to Best Buy and using their credit card points to buy a computer.
Yeah.
And so there's really no structure, and that'll lead to a lot of issues later on in terms of standardization, support, and things like that. But in that 1 to 10 range, it's the CEO is playing the role of IT manager a lot of times, making the decisions about technology strategy. They're the one that's thinking about cybersecurity protections and things like that.
And you bring up a great point there, cybersecurity. What at that point should you really be thinking about from a hardening perspective to protect your team at that size?
It is a trade-off, right? So if you have limited resources, only so much of those resources can go towards cybersecurity. But going with the trusted brands in terms of email, having the cloud-based or this cloud-based email services for Microsoft or Google come with a lot of inherent
Yeah.
protections. There are some low-cost like add-ons in terms of email filtering, anti-spear phishing protection, things like that that you can add on to the system. Around that 1 to 10 employee range is where you really want to start thinking about protecting your devices. And so buying company or providing company owned devices, adding a device management feature. And there's now an emergence of a lot of low cost tools where somebody in the organization can do that on their own in terms of adding policies onto the laptops, backing up laptops, and backing up your cloud instance is always something that you can do. And there are modules and add-ons where you could do that yourself. But about the 10 employee range is really where you want to start working with an expert. And so thinking about in that range, it's usually like a local IT consultant
Mhm.
and, paying them for a few hours a month of dedicated support. I always advise our clients to think about proactive work as well as reactive work. A lot of times they think, we just need somebody to show up when things are broken, but you really do need to have somebody in your corner who knows what to look for, who can think ahead for you and start to plan an IT strategy.
I like how you highlighted that it's both reactive and the proactive. That's a great time to, when you're focused on IT, that should, in my opinion, be where you're spending your time 50-50 of what do we need to do for maybe the next ridgeline or two so we can start setting the conditions now and tracking progress on that roadmap while still being responsive to IT needs in the organization that come up. Before we move to really that next size of growth, because I think there's some good conversation too that you had mentioned the device manager. Help desk, it is a valid point. Depending on how technical savvy your organization is, maybe you're all engineers and it's like, hey, y'all can figure it out. And if it's just really broke, then here, we're going to run the corporate card real quick. But if you may not have as many technical users for your type of company, how have you seen people manage I can't get Zoom to work, or those little things that come up in an organization?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of times they just live with it, right? In that 1 to 10 and even in the 10 to 30 bucket, a lot of times it's kind of a bring your own device and it's maybe even like bring your own
Yeah.
tools. So somebody might have Zoom, somebody else might have Google Meet. And so we see that kind of evolution where they might live with it for a little bit and then they just move on. Challenge there is then nobody's standardized and you're potentially paying for multiple tools, and not capturing the
Yeah.
benefit of having a one program for your organization. And so, we often see that where it's almost just sprawl, right? It's there aren't choiceful decisions that are being made to build the IT program. Things are just kind of evolving on their own without anybody guiding it.
At that point, do you see people mostly just like, hey, go hit up Geek Squad at Best Buy? Or are there packages that MSPs offer, managed service providers offer, that when you're like, hey, I only need like a 1-800 number that maybe like a couple hours a month?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And starting out, right, a lot of companies will rely on the local IT person, right, to stop in. Those folks usually will show up on a weekly or biweekly cadence. They'll pop into the office, see what's going on, and maybe set up. The difference, I think, primarily between a local IT consultant and an MSP is that managed service providers typically have a
Mm-hmm.
program. So when you sign up for the managed service provider service, you're not just getting a number that you can call every once in a while. You're getting, structure and process and documentation and tools that the service provider is going to deploy to your organization is also managing for hundreds of other organizations, and they're able to take those learnings and apply them to your program as well. And so that's to me the biggest benefit between just having somebody pop in every few weeks for an hour or two and see if anything's broken versus a managed service provider who will be building an IT program, giving a roadmap that'll help your organization scale. And then it also comes with a whole bunch of knowledge and tools, and not just one person you could call, but an entire team, usually with overnight support and things like that.
Oh, for sure. And that's something I never thought of as, there's vendors that provide different services, but never really thought about, yeah, there truly is a market separation between just the local IT guy and, professional managed service provider type, and a different point of your business. There may be a time where one matters more than the other. So,
Yeah, yeah.
well, I think that's a great time to go into the 10 to 30 employee mark that you had mentioned. And I know Justin has a great blog post that's actually going to be linked in the show notes that highlights all this. But really there you labeled this phase IT basics, as you're starting to get more members on the team. So really what comes into play? I know we had started talking device management, but what else comes into play from IT strategy needs?
At this scale, I think of it as employee experience. You have enough employees on board, and you're probably hiring at the cadence where you really do need to have a process defined for their first day, what happens in the lead up, the week prior to them starting, in their first few weeks and making sure that they have access to all the systems. Because in that 10 to 30 range, that's where there starts to be a delineation of departments. That's when there tends to be a lot of information that needs to be stored in folders and things like that. And so having a very clear process for how do you onboard a new employee, what permissions do they get, what permissions do they specifically not get, what systems do they get, what level of access in the CRM or the ERP or things like that, is really important to have that process defined. So on their first day, they can be really effective. And it's a reflection of the company in general, right?
Yeah.
Like that's your first impression on your new employee. So you want to have that process really well defined. Having, somebody walk them through their laptop
Yeah.
setup on day one. If you go to a 10,000 person company, on day one, you're going to go and the IT department's going to come and sit with you for 2 hours and show you the laptop and set up your email and all those things. So really having that at a small company can be a cultural multiplier that you don't get another chance to make that first impression. So having those processes set up helps onboard your employee more efficiently and give them a better day one experience. So I think about the structure of your IT program could largely be centered around what does the day one experience look like, and then building off of that, making it very clear and easy for them who they go to for support. And oh, by the way, don't go to your manager or don't go to the CEO, because if at 30 people, if the CEO is getting all the IT requests, they're not able to do their job. And so having that part of the structure. The other thing in this 10 to 30 person, and I'm making the assumption that they're going to want to continue to grow, but in that 10 to 30 person range is really where you start to see the breakdown of departments and role functions and things like that. So that is the stage where not everybody needs access to everything. Probably at this stage is where you could start to see department heads making decisions about IT for their own departments and getting systems and things like that. The problem that comes with that, where you want to be really mindful, is if you're trying to secure those systems, you're trying to standardize those things, and you're trying to manage them against a budget, it becomes really difficult to do that if those people are doing that. So having a very clearly defined process for switching systems, deploying new systems, and then also offboarding systems if they're no longer used, that is really important at that stage. So you don't get to 50 to 100 people and find that you have 3 different ERP systems in 3 different departments, for example. So that's my view in that 10 to 30 person range, is really just setting those processes.
Yeah, I think that's super smart, is having that checklist, having that process that you're going through. And you brought up offboarding though too. And that's something that as you get, like you said, you get those departments and hey, maybe the design element has a Figma license and Adobe license over there. And then very quickly you start realizing like nobody offboarded those licenses, and like your SaaS cost is just right. Like you've got ghost accounts that aren't being used, but are still hitting the corporate card. And it's not a ton, like $100 here, $200 there a month that you don't notice, but multiply that times a couple charges a month times a year. And now that starts adding up to some real money.
Yeah. I think that's one benefit we see when we onboard a new MSP client. If they've never worked with a professional IT person before who comes up with a map of the IT infrastructure, they just don't know what's out there. And that's just from a budgetary perspective. We've seen people where they're paying double for their IT licenses, and there's an immediate spend that, oh, by the way, that probably pays for the IT program with the MSP. But in an extreme case, double. But undoubtedly, every organization has unused licenses. The flip side of that is what we call shadow IT, where the IT manager or the MSP have a hard time knowing what's out there if people have just purchased systems. And though bad for budgetary reasons, but it's also really bad for cybersecurity reasons. You can't protect your systems if you don't know they're there. And that includes things like add-ons to browsers. That includes like add-ons to email and things like that. So it's really important to have a process for requesting system additions, and then evaluating them, and then adding them in, integrated with the cybersecurity program.
The one thing that you also highlighted is the departments and standardization is inventory. And you mentioned it too in the kind of the previous business persona, but you can find very quickly that you've got a bunch of different laptops running in the wild. And then it gets confusing when a new person's coming on and it's no longer the CEO buying it or a senior leader buying it, well, what laptop is this person supposed to get besides this person? And then how do you life cycle
Yeah.
all that stuff? That's where I think at this size too, that starts coming into play. Like when you talk about processing, not just the onboarding, or it really is part of the onboarding, okay, what system does this person need to standardize?
Yeah. Yeah, the bias is always towards getting the cheapest price or buying from, a convenient channel like Amazon. But there are some implications later on in terms of, we talked about
Yeah.
standardization, but just, are you able to roll the same cybersecurity tools to all these different laptops? When you start to think about managing these devices as corporate owned devices, putting policies on them, the cybersecurity tools, blocking websites or and then backing them up to the cloud, that becomes really difficult if you've procured them from different channels, especially Apple devices. Like Apple has done a very
Oh
good
yeah.
job of helping companies standardize their device management. But if you're procuring those from Amazon or from Best Buy, it can be pretty difficult. And so that's where having a standard channel and standard models, like you don't have to get too granular, but like having one standard model for technical resources, one standard model for non-technical resources, it becomes really important for the cybersecurity program later on. And then also having like spare stock, carrying, if you're 20 people, maybe you have two laptops at the office to send if one breaks down. But having that standardization just makes everything else simpler later on.
Oh yeah, and you brought up a great point, especially with Apple products, of that if you don't procure an Apple properly, trying to get it on a device manager can be much more difficult. So you either need to have your own Apple store that you can purchase through your company, which usually takes a week or so to set up with your rep. You can buy from Best Buy, but you need to do Best Buy for Business where they can put your Apple ID in. Because in a perfect world, you buy it, and the moment they open it, it automatically knows that that's your company's laptop. But if you don't buy it
Yeah.
a certain way through Apple, you have to have somebody manually install that device manager
Yeah.
at your office before it goes. Depending on how you bought it, you may not even be able to enroll it. So,
Yeah, exactly. The flip side of that is if the device is lost or stolen, having the device manager on it will allow you to wipe that computer and purge the company data. It makes it useless for the person who stole it. So there's a preventative measure there. If the person is locked out and it's a computer that they purchased from one of these other channels, there is a chance that the best technical resources won't be able to get in unless they have the encryption keys escrowed and things like that. And so that's why it's so important to have that standard procurement channel and also have a process for as soon as that order is made, documenting the encryption keys, the ID that was associated with the set of the
yeah.
computer. Someone's using their own personal Apple ID, for instance, it makes it really hard to use that computer again for the next employee. And so that's why it's so important to have that, what we would call a device inventory process mapped out.
Yeah, and that was really the impetus for us to really start getting into device management. Was after getting a couple laptops back from employees that had left that had their personal Apple IDs on there and they didn't wipe the laptop properly. Now you've got a stack of bricked MacBooks and you're like, hey, this is starting to get expensive right here.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
so I would like to talk about device manager and mobile device managers. What is it and what does it allow you to do?
So mobile device management, MDM, is the process of centrally managing your fleet of devices and allowing you to push things like policies, restrictions, updates, patches, etc., from a central location, from your IT department. There's a lot of confusion around MDM. A lot of people associate that word mobile with a mobile device, a cell phone, an iPhone, etc. There are applications of device management for phones, and it's becoming more
Yeah.
common, especially if you have some serious compliance frameworks for your business. But in general, when we talk about MDM, most of the use cases are actually on laptops. And so device managers essentially, there's common ones for Apple, Jamf, Adigy, Kanji, and then there's some common ones for PCs. Microsoft Intune is probably the most prevalent. Allow the IT department better control of the device. Contrasting that with something that's somewhat similar, which is called RMM, remote metric monitoring, which is essentially just being able to see what's going on the computer and some limited capabilities, whereas MDM allows much greater access to centrally manage the computer.
And MDM is going to be the thing that lets you, if somebody's locked out, I can get them back in. if an employee leaves or a laptop gets stolen, can remotely wipe it, protect company data. And as you said too, like make sure that you're forcing those cyber controls depending on, and you can really scale that up or down. But to roll that out, there's one thing I learned that easier said than done. So there's definitely some considerations there to think about. So when rolling it out, what should I be thinking about? Like first, maybe when it comes to selection, and then when it comes to actually deploying that on my devices in my company.
I'll just preface this statement with I'm not the expert here. And so at our companies, we have people who specialize, have certifications in mobile device
You really
management.
need
To your point,
to.
it is, yeah, and to your point, it is such a complicated thing. So, when thinking about what MDMs are available, there's been a ton of movement in this space in the last couple of years, right? Microsoft, Apple are really leaning into MDM for that 1 to 10 user space. Like they're making big investments that should make it easier for companies to push themselves and manage devices themselves if they don't have a technical resource on staff or they don't work with an MSP. And they're also making it easier for the technical resources who are running large fleets of devices to manage that. So I think those companies, all the big players in the computer industry, have recognized that these are stakeholders that they really have to pay attention to, and they've made big improvements over the last few years. There's just been a lot of venture capital pouring in to solution providers for MDM as well, and so you've seen new ones pop up, and you've seen some of the ones who were already kind of established players continue to grow. And so just kind of share that perspective. It's been a big topic in the IT world for the last few years, and we've seen a lot of progress. So when you're thinking about what MDM would best serve you, I think, it kind of starts with that. What life cycle are you in? Are you in this kind of bring your own device, self-managed IT model? Or are you in this like, hey, we're really at this stage where we need to professionalize this? And so there are different products you could choose for that. One thing is always just talking to your experts, like who's in your corner at the time. A lot of people rely heavily on the folks at the Apple Store. They're business pros at the Apple Store, and they have great resources for device management if you're going with like kind of the self-managed path. And then they also can introduce you to a consultant or to an MSP. And so that's one area is just like, I would consult someone before making that choice because it is so important. You can spend a lot of time doing research on all the tools. And then deploying it, there is a cultural component to this. If you're in that BYOD model, like that is a very difficult conversation to say, hey, we're going to start limiting what you can do with your laptop. We're also going to be monitoring it. There's like always a very important conversation to have with your staff before deploying those tools. And it's really about protecting company data and ensuring that the person can be really productive. There's always this kind of fear of big brother, hey, we're going to have that, especially in a growing company. But at the end of the day, those are business assets, and then they're using these tools to do their job. And so we want to enable both sides of that equation.
I don't know, in your experience with the device managers, one of the things that we had to consider rolling one out was I can install it if I've got a laptop that's already out in the wild that may be company property, but we had not formalized it yet. I can't just push an image and have total control. Like there's still a back door there, depending on the solution, if you're not installing that device manager from the start when that computer comes out of the box or gets wiped, correct? So that's definitely something you have to take into consideration.
So it depends. And so there are ways to get an MDM fully deployed to a device that's already in the wild, but there are service providers. Interlaced is one of our companies who focus on Apple IT. And so there are nuances to how you would do that and skill sets that technicians can build. And so I think it depends on the solution provider and it depends on the tools, but that's why it's so important to consult an expert.
Yeah, I think that's the big subject of a lot of these conversations. Had a guest on the other day. It was you can spend a lot of time and money yourself trying to figure this out, but it's worth just getting on a call with an expert and having them show you, walk through the business case, look at your budget, because there's options that span, like I looked at Jamf. Jamf's one of the big ones out there, but Jamf is very expensive, but it has a lot of features. Yeah. And then there's other ones, Apple's, I think one of the cheaper ones last time I looked at it, but there's not a ton of control. So you said 1 to 10, it works great. If you're growing, like it's not going to give you everything you
Yeah.
need. So
Yeah, really where those things, you mentioned control, tend to break down is when there's a lot of other systems that are connecting in, and when you really need to start being mindful of your policies. And so having more control over the tools will allow you to add more strenuous or more stringent policies. It'll allow you to produce reporting for things like your SOC 2 attestation or things like that, right? And so that's why having the business goals in mind. Today we're 20 people, and next year we think we're going to be 100 people. Okay, that means we're going to have more people that need to be able to access these systems. That's a huge consideration. What are the business goals? Do we have clients that are demanding that we become SOC 2 compliant? If so, okay, great. We need to select the tools now that'll help us get there. Even if we don't implement the policies yet, but we want to make sure that the tools we're selecting will scale. And then there's the budgetary component as well. Like for our clients, we try to do these assessments of how can we check the most boxes? Like we select the tools that will check the most boxes on these security frameworks. So you're not having to select 30 different tools and then pay for them. And oh, by the way, that could potentially slow down computers and things like that. And so that's why, going through that forward-looking analysis is so important.
and really, as we're closing out this 10 to 30 headcount persona, would you say this is really the time that you should be probably talking to a managed services provider and starting to look at, while you may not be signing a contract yet, starting to look at least to what that strategy should be and pinning a date of when you think you may want to start bringing somebody on board?
100%. Yeah. And I would even say this is when you need to be
Yeah,
onboarding
I'd
with
agree.
a
Yeah.
managed service provider, right? So we really think for most of our businesses, the value proposition really starts to become solid in the 10 to 15 person organization. Maybe below that, they're not hiring at a clip where it's really like if you hire 10% of your staff every year, right? Like you're hiring one or two people. And so that's not
Yeah.
super cumbersome to go off and build that. But once you start to get to 10 to 15 and growing, that's where the complexity of the IT systems start to build. You start to face some of those compliance requirements. And that's where the amount of requests that come in for help and things like that start to bog down whoever is wearing the IT manager hat. And so that's the point at which it really does make sense to engage someone.
Yeah, when the founder doesn't want to be spending, it's fine if it's 10, 15 minutes a week, but when it starts becoming an hour, 2 hours times the
Yeah.
HR side, the
Yeah.
payroll, the everything else,
Yep.
that starts becoming a lot of things taken away. So jumping on to the 30 to 50 employee bucket, I know you would call this the emergence of shadow IT. We talked about this a little bit briefly. What do you see happening here in this phase of the business and kind of headcount size?
I would say really in this range is where you really need to start thinking about separation between proactive and reactive IT. And so 30 to 50 people, that's a lot of requests coming in. That's a lot of needs. This is really where the silos start to break down between departments. And so for us, we really think about having somebody who can reach across the departments and help make decisions on tools. This is probably where you're going to start to shift from some of these like low cost, out of the box cloud based solutions to like professional licenses for things. And so these are where like we see a lot of companies making choices of, okay, we started off on just a general business license for Teams or for Google Suite. Really, should we be on one or the other? Because the licensing cost starts to become a real thing. And so this is really where you may have focused a lot on reactive work, but there needs to be a strategic work and how decisions are being made. The marketing team will have a very different viewpoint from the finance team, will have a very different viewpoint from the technical team. And so that's really in this range is where we see there starts to be a need and enough work where having one IT person isn't enough. If there is one IT person, they're going to be so bogged down with the reactive stuff that they're not going to get any of the proactive work done. They're not going to be building the IT program. They're just going to be always behind on their projects and just overwhelmed with the amount of requests that are coming their way.
But in theory, if you have outsourced some of this to like a managed service provider, you're still at a size though where you could let the MSP handle a lot of your day-to-day reactive, and then it could still be an additional duty for someone to look at more the okay, are we doing what we need to on the reactive? And then, okay, let's look at the next steps.
Yeah, 100%. That's why it's so important to have, like, even if you do have an IT manager, you could still be leveraging an MSP in this bucket because the two sides of that hat. It's a very special person who can manage all of that and still build the program. MSPs, will have that capability. They have project managers and architects, and they're helping companies navigate these systems implementations and these decisions. And so a lot of times the MSP becomes just an extended part of the team and can help you with those decisions. And oh, by the way, they have dozens of people who are focused on the reactive tickets. And so that's why it's such a powerful value proposition, because they're giving you both sides of that coin without you having to hire an IT director and, one or two junior IT analysts at the same time.
Yeah, because I think that always becomes the hard part is like you need those fractional advisory service, the fractional help desk still. And if you're looking at what your budget is, the affordable IT guy, if you will, that skill set is much different than like the systems architect. And you maybe can't afford the systems architect. And, it's always those like trade-offs of that weird position.
In this 30, in this 30 to 50 bucket, and then really amplifies in like the 50 to 80 and the 80 plus what you called the fractional bucket. And I would say it's like, okay, I need 1.5 help desk analysts. I need one IT director, but at that scale, you can't afford that. And so if you need 1.5, you really need two, because that person needs to go on vacation and have a life, and they get sick and things like that. And so really that's what makes this bucket such a sweet spot for MSPs, because the value proposition against hiring 3 full-time staff members to the tune of $400,000 a year versus paying an MSP a nominal service fee, that's really where the value proposition shines in this range from a purely price perspective.
For sure. Really up until like you're getting into the 100, that's where it's always that weird. People side sees it too. You're back. Everyone sees it. That you're in like you have all these fractional needs, and it's where do you invest? Normally IT is not that one. Well, it's easiest to outsource too.
And it's not core. Yeah. What we always see, we'll see companies who have attempted to push in and scale, and they'll come to one of our companies and they'll be, around 50 or 80 people. And we'll ask like, who is running the IT department right now? And they're like, oh, it's the data analyst, the 22-year-old fresh out of college data scientist, or the software developer. And like, oh, that's a lot of work for the software developer. They're like, yeah, they did really good when we were 30 people, but now we're 80 people and they're not writing any code. And
so then next we got 50 to 80. And I know you would call this really the business drivers starting to become IT security and compliance, if they haven't become that already, depending on your industry. So what do you see happening here? And would love to dive into some of the compliance standards and what those are as well.
We get a lot of requests from prospective clients and current clients where they say like, oh my gosh, we just signed this our sales team just signed this amazing deal. We're, onboarding this new client, or we're starting this project, but then we got a compliance letter from their IT director or their security director where we need to adopt to their security standards. And so we see this often with Fortune 500 companies, but we're starting to see that those compliance requests push down, where maybe even like a 300 person company, if they sign a new marketing agency, that marketing agency 10 or 15 people needs to start producing those documents. So we're starting to see those compliance requirements emerge earlier, but usually in this 50 to 80, and once you're starting to get towards 100 employees, is where you really start to have those compliance frameworks handed to you. And quite often it's either time to a funding round with a startup. Investors are really starting to think about cybersecurity risk. It could be preparing for an exit. So a lot of times if you're acquiring a company nowadays, you want to look at their cybersecurity program, because you don't want to inherit a bunch of risk, or worse, you don't want to inherit a business that's actively being hacked, right? And so this is typically like when businesses are starting to think about either an exit or another funding round, or they're starting to attract those larger clients. And so that's why, I would say in this bucket is really where having compliance and security frameworks in mind becomes really, really important for the C-suite. And a lot of times it's the COO or the CFO who are driving that initiative. And a lot of times that's when they seek an MSP.
What are the different types of certifications? Because there's NIST, CMMC on the GovCon side, I know, and then you have ISO.
Yep.
We already talked SOC 2. What are the ones out there? Which ones should I focus on? How do I know which ones I should focus on?
I'll preface this with I am not the
Oh
compliance
yeah,
person. I'm not a
it's a
security
highly
person.
technical thing.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
never
and
forget
people go
when
to
we were trying to do compliance. I actually had worked with one of Justin's portfolio companies, and we're on the call talking about this and the need to implement one of the NIST standards. And he brings up a 120 cell spreadsheet checklist.
yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, and so, the selection of, we advise everyone to at least have a framework to work against. What that framework is, like most of the frameworks accomplish a lot of the same things. Some of them are more administrative in nature. And it's like, hey, I want to make sure you have policies for this. I want to make sure you have tools in place. It's almost like a checklist of things to build in terms of a best practice for your program. And then there are frameworks that are really oriented towards securing a lot of the different threat vectors. And so I think a lot of the common ones will accomplish both, but it's a different use case. It's like, am I really focused on securing and improving my IT program, or am I concerned about dialing in the ability to prove that to others? And so it's like in a general sense, the frameworks may accomplish different things, but you listed the most common ones: HIPAA in the medical
Oh yeah.
space.
Yeah.
If you're in banking, there's a whole another suite of things to think through, and PCI and FINRA and things like that. But so the thought is adopting one of these common security frameworks will allow you to make measurable progress, and that's what's important is having a documented progress and then going against it. If you don't know where to start, the places I would go would be an MSP or a cybersecurity consultant, your insurance company. Your cybersecurity insurance company will give you
Yeah.
a pretty good checklist as you're going through applications, and then there's just a bunch of good materials online as well. So, thinking through selecting or knowing when it's time. If you're working with investors, asking them what the other companies are doing. We find a lot of companies are making good progress before they come to work with one of our MSPs because they've got good recommendations from their peer group, their CEO circles or their business peer groups, etc. There's a lot of good information out there. There are also, the emergence of a lot of nonprofits now, where there's some groups in Los Angeles and here in San Diego that will just give you free consulting. The purpose of the nonprofit is to help protect the business community. There are some of those now, and they won't, implement anything for you, but they'll sit you down and explain to those things. So I would look for some of those resources.
Yeah, because it's definitely not something that you can implement overnight. Because if you don't even have a device manager in place, you can't even start thinking about getting some of these controls in place. And then when you start doing these, you don't want to, for example, I'll use the NIST. It was like 110 different controls or 120, something like that. A lot. And the worst thing I can do with a bunch of developers on staff is push the one update that locks everything down and brings the business to a grinding halt. So, it's one of those that you have to iterate and see how it impacts, even as you said, the different departments and how you roll that out. It's a very deliberate strategy and something that you're not implementing one of these standards overnight. Like I would say that's best case, maybe 6 months. Like that's probably even moving.
And that's why it's so important to work with a professional, because they'll find those efficiencies, right? They'll think, you look at that checklist and you're like, I have to do every single one of these, but they may be able to recommend a system that eliminates the need for 10 of those, right? And so there's a lot of benefit to having a professional guide you through that process when it's time to go through one of these frameworks.
Yeah, and even if you're not ready to do that, ours was super helpful in just saying, hey, like here's 20 controls that are just good to have, and here's why. Like the little things of, hey, we're not going to allow people to use their personal Apple IDs. We're going to enforce BitLocker on everything, and File Vault, sorry. And, some of those basic ones that really just help get you a baseline across. So
yeah, and that's why cybersecurity, you mentioned, is a journey, right?
Oh yeah.
You're never going to be fully secure, right? There's always going to be new vectors opening up, and then your people are always a vector. And so that's why it's important to treat it as a journey and just finding a framework to make measurable improvement each quarter and constantly taking a look at it. So I think it's something we've seen quite a bit is companies putting a premium on that earlier on, and it's paying dividends for them in terms of fewer hacks, fewer distractions, and to your point, better user experience through that journey. And so the earlier you can start on cybersecurity, the better.
Okay, last bucket is 80 to 200. And really, this is where an MSP may not be the most cost effective anymore. Separation of IT duties. What's happening in the organization? What are some of the needs and considerations here from an IT strategy
Yeah.
perspective?
Yeah. I would actually say the MSP value proposition holds up really well through this bucket, and above this bucket is probably where
Or
it
you think
starts to break
200
down.
is where it starts?
Yeah, if you kind of do the
Yeah.
math on what would the full-time staff need to cost versus the MSP, like the value proposition does hold up pretty well. I would say this range though is where you do want to have somebody on staff as an IT director. Maybe that person also owns business systems. They're not just managing the MSP, but somebody who's maybe the cybersecurity director, they might own all the production business systems, the ERP and things like that. So I do think it's important to have somebody on staff technical that's able to run the
So
program.
a good way to frame it
Um,
maybe is this is the transition phase.
yeah, yeah. And it's a pretty good, hopefully you grow
Yeah.
really quickly, but 80 to 200 is a pretty big jump. I would say in this range is where you really need to start thinking about having a senior technical leader on staff who would work with your IT team, working with your business operations systems team to help. The common theme we've been talking about is having a structured program to run that program and evolve it.
Now that we've covered the different business personas, really now looking at the IT plan, the selection of an MSP. So, starting on the IT strategy realm, if I'm starting to sit down and think about this, how far out do I really need to be paying attention? Do I need to be kind of looking on a 6-month, 12-month, 18-month time frame? What really makes the most sense to tackle this type of problem set?
So we think about having a quarterly roadmap, right? And I think that's something that's 6 months or 12 months away. That's so far out, I don't really need to think about it. And so that's why I really think it's important to be thinking about your IT program in quarterly chunks. You might have an annual planning process and thinking about the big systems we want to push or the big goals, but in order to make progress, I think quarterly goals is the appropriate cadence. And just like you might have quarterly revenue goals, you might have quarterly HR goals. And if you're running your business off of a common framework like Rockefeller
Yeah.
Habits or EOS or something like that, I think it's important to have a track and have measurable goals for your IT program.
And how does that look like in execution of building that out? So, you're going to have somebody that you've onboarded to be your services provider. Somebody in your organization, you can't fully outsource everything. Somebody's still chief
Yep.
IT. How do you set that plan up and then make sure that you're moving along it? What are the
Yeah,
best
yeah.
practices you've seen as an MSP integrating with businesses to try to keep forward progress going?
Yeah, I think you hit a really key point, which is even the best outsourced managed service providers aren't going to have all the information
Hmm.
that your business does. And so that's why we really view it as a partnership, right? Like whoever the business leader, it could be the chief operating officer, it could be the people officer, it could be, the CFO, someone who is owning the relationship with the MSP. It is super critical to have that quarterly meeting where you sit down. Let's talk about what are the goals of the businesses for the next quarter. Oh, we just got a big round of funding. We're going to be doubling our staff. That's something that the MSP with advance notice can really help you plan for, right? They can call out things, they can help see around those corners. And so that's why it's so critical having first their relationship, just having that engagement with somebody in the business. And then second is having that touch base that, some of our businesses will do what's called a semi-annual business review. Some of them will do a triennial business review. What's really common in the MSP industry is to do a quarterly business review. And we call it a business review and not an IT review because we really think of it as a business
Yeah, it
partnership.
truly
We want to
is.
enable Yeah, we want to enable your business goals. And so during that meeting, it's really important to think about what are the big initiatives that the company is tackling in that quarter. We're going to be setting up a new office. The IT department will be really, really instrumental in setting that up. We're going to be spinning up a new department. Okay, great. That's a great time to involve, your IT department, your MSP. And the things that the MSP will be doing to prepare for that meeting are things like taking a look at the age of the fleet of devices, right? Make sure that we're starting to think about replacing devices before they get old and start to break
Yeah.
down or start running slow and things like that. Taking a look at the systems that are in place and thinking if there's any efficiencies we can gain for that. They'll also be analyzing the ticket data of all the reactive help desk tickets that have come in, and maybe there are symptoms that we can address proactively. So we start to see an increase in device tickets, or we start to see an increase in email tickets. Okay, what's driving those? And those could be things like we're starting to get a lot of spam, we're starting to get a lot of email bounce backs and things like that. And so having that analyzation and laying it out on the table will really help evolve the partnership for the benefit of the end users.
Yeah, those are some great considerations of how that thing should run. And I think really home run into the last question. I know we only have a couple minutes left, but the question I always like asking is, if you were a business owner or a senior leader looking at managed service providers, what would be the things that you would be looking for when trying to decide which one to go with for your business?
I would say the number one thing, and this is probably the least common, is finding a service provider that's culturally aligned with your business. It doesn't have to mean they have the same colors in their brand and things like that, but finding a company that understands your business, where the staff just feels like an extended part of your team. There's a lot of managed service providers out there. There's a lot of really good ones, but not every MSP is the right MSP if you're a business. And so we see a lot of MSPs that specialize in certain industries, and there's a ton of benefit of working with an MSP who really understands your industry. They're going to know business systems you use and what are the common issues that come along with those. They're going to know better how to support your business operation. So like if you're a dental practice, Monday morning is very important that all your systems are working, right? Because if the dental practice is done, so like one of our companies is a dental MSP, and they've structured their entire support team to make sure that their clinics are going to be open on Monday morning. So they have people that are working on Sundays to prep for that, right? And so finding a service provider, the staff is going to feel like an extended part of your team. They're culturally aligned, have the similar interests, and they really do feel like if you were going to walk down the hall and go to your IT department, and then making sure that they know about your industry is really important.
I think that's great. I love that culture aspect. That's something that is really big, because you're going to spend a lot of time, at least at the beginning, with initial planning.
Yeah.
And I know that was a lesson learned for me of like, there's times like I feel like we're talking past each other just because the way our business operates, you're trying to communicate that. And once we finally got that, things were running well. But that was a great point that I never thought of when I was doing my first MSP selection. That's a great gold nugget there. Well, Justin, appreciate the time. Appreciate you coming on today and all the nuggets of information. And for those watching, we'll have the blog post that Justin and we had referenced a lot during the show in the show notes. Justin, if there's folks that want to connect with you, what's the best way to connect?
Yeah, Justin T. Wells on LinkedIn. And then otherwise, we've got 12 great MSPs. And so check out our website, westwoodtechgroup.com, and you can see each of our companies and connect with them as well.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Justin.
All right. Thanks, Brian, for having me.